All right, cool. Well, so the title of my presentation is Key to the Mysteries, Kenneth Grant's Against the Light as Roman on Clay, Occult, Allegory, and Play. And as Casper kindly mentioned a moment ago, I'm at Falmouth University in Cornwall in the UK. I'm Associate Professor of Games and Occulture, which means that I sort of study and practice play as a transformative and transcendent practice, and in terms of esotericism, I study sabbatic craft, kind of the work of Andrew Chumbley, at the intersection of the left-hand path and the Typhonian current. And speaking of the Typhonian current, here's Kenneth Grant. Many people in the audience are doubtless familiar with his basics, but just in case, Kenneth Grant, born 1924, died 2011, British occultist, Aleister Crowley's secretary at the ripe young age of 20. Crowley was 70, living in Netherwood, Hastings. The founder of the Typhonian OTO and head of the New Isis Lodge from 1955 to 1962. Now, Grant is best known for his work on the Typhonian trilogies, 9 densely packed, carefully argued, highly elusive works of occult lore written between 1972 and 2003. But he also wrote fiction, short stories, novellas, and one novel, which was entitled Against the Light. And by Kenneth Grant's own description, this book was a compendium of magical formulae woven into a quasi-autobiographical account of alien contacts, which bears very closely upon this Book of Oakbeach. So the Book of Oakbeach is a kind of channeled document. What's interesting about Against the Light is that it sits within Grant's kind of larger thinking about the relationship between fiction and magic. So he declares in the Magical Revival that fiction as a vehicle has often been used by occultists. And so his notion is that ideas which are sort of unacceptable in mundane everyday life can be kind of slipped past the various censors of our unconscious in the form of entertaining narratives, poems, short stories, and so on and so forth. But Against the Light, even viewed in that light, is sort of quirky in that he describes it as a kind of footnote to the reception of a text, of a channeled document, which is then commented upon at length in the final volume of the Typhonian trilogies, which is the 9th Arch. So we kind of have the fictionalization of the reception of a channeled document, which is also commenting on the channeled document. And there's some good previous work done on this, notably Alan Moore's incredible review of Against the Light, which is eminently quotable, like everything Moore writes. I'm going to try not to quote from it too much. But there's a beautiful line in which Moore says that read as novel or as magic treatise, it will fail to satisfy because it doesn't have the neat structure of fiction nor the compelling credulity of fact. But read as a chimera of the two, of magical treatise and novel, that's where it gets interesting. Similarly, Christian Gudice, has written a good essay on the Typhonian trilogies and the fusion between literature and practiced magic, in which he argues that Grant deliberately uses fictive strategies in order to place readers in a liminal state in which they are more receptive to magical influence. But how? How can a piece of fiction operate as a compendium of magical formulae? Well, I want to suggest that at some level Against the Light is a roman à clef. In the classic sense of that word, it's a novel of the key. It's a personal, autobiographical narrative encoded as fiction, but it's also a key in the larger sense. It's something that unlocks mysteries. It encodes practices. It condenses almost as a précis or abstract what it takes Grant thousands of pages and decades of writing to sort of get to. So how? Well, what actually happens in Against the Light? And the answer is sort of not much, but a lot. It's got 3 parts. Prologue, part 1, Grant and a medium that he's working with find a hidden grimoire, 2 candlesticks and a scrying globe in a crypt in Candleston in Wales. Part 2, Grant sees a series of visions in the scrying globe that were found. Part 3, Grant has a series of wild visions that culminate in the memory of a child's pop-up book, and that image is going to be very important, that pop-up book that revealed mysteries. But the funny thing about it is that when we look at Against the Light as a roman à clef in the classic sense, it gets sort of tricky because there's a protagonist whose name is quote-unquote Kenneth Grant. There's a Margaret Leasing. There's a Margaret Weird, who may also be a Weird. There's a Dr. Phineas Marsh Black. Aleister Crowley shows up as a character. And some of these people kind of check out. Like, you can hunt down Margaret Weird, and sure enough, there was a Margaret Weird living in the 16th and 17th century in Suffolk, in Brundish, basically where Grant puts her, but not at the time that he puts her, and there's no kind of historical record of her being burnt as a witch. Similarly, there's some real places. Candleston Ruins in Wales is real. The Church of St. Lawrence is real. All of those places can be visited. Some of the other places can be visited. Chancery Lane is for sure real. It is the site of a Bush's Emporium. It was the site where Crowley and Alan Bennett did a bunch of their goetic magic. But not all of it checks out, and increasingly we move into kind of dream psychogeography. And so, we're haunted once more by kind of Alan Moore's comments, which is, the question that has surely haunted every reader of Grant's earlier writing is just how much of this is supposed to be, real. It's uncertain, and moreover, it gets trickier because we are told that against the light, Grant tells us, is a loaded expression, and that the narrative is meant to reveal some of the inner workings of the new Isis Lodge. But again, how? We know that Grant tended towards heavy systemization in the organization of the Typhonian OTO. He superimposed the grades of the Argentium Astrum, the sort of Crowley's inner order, onto the grades of the OTO. Steffi Grant put this kind of pyramid diagram together of all of these practices. But Against the Light is definitely not a manual of these practices. It does not proceed systemically. What I want to suggest to you is that it is, as its title suggests, a Nightside narrative, and let me get into what that would mean. I think it means that partially unreal events encode real practices. So specifically these practices: scrying, controlled dreaming, sex magic as a means of contact with praeter-human or extraterrestrial intelligence, which allows for channeling of oracular documents, which reveal tangential tantra, which allow for a hypertextual navigation of the web of intra, which enables a kind of divine play or lila between absolute consciousness of pure subjectivity and the maya of objectification. And so, okay, let's look back at the events of the novel and see if we can sort of read them in that way. Well, part one is definitely about scrying. It's about finding the tools to be able to scry, and scrying so effectively that an entity known as Creeksor, a kind of tangled solar lunar light, actually lands on Margaret Leasing's head and kind of bonds with her. But scrying, or as Grant always spells it, scrying with a K, is a little bit different than seeing the future in a crystal ball. Scrying for Grant is looking through the radiance of the mauve zone. The globe hums and thrums with a mauve luster, and the mauve zone in Grant's thinking is a kind of liminal space, sort of between dreams and dreamless sleep and waking. Moreover, scrying is a form of projection, just as we're sort of projecting onto these monitors. I'll go back one so people can take that if they want to. Okay, God, I love that image. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I gotta keep going. Okay, so the reception of the Book of Oakbeach, then, is an act of projection and steganographic scrying. Steganographic would mean sort of secret writing. So the phrase "against the light" has to do with a critical moment that sort of occurs over and over again in the narrative, in which a page from the grimoire is held up to a window, and the light that streams through is this mauve light that reveals something that wasn't there before. And Grant is constantly coming back to Finnegan's Wake, the James Joyce novel, as a way of sort of explaining this or prefiguring it. So there's two moments in Finnegan's Wake in which the verso of a manuscript is held up, and a new book of Morsis responded most remarkably to the world's oldest light. So we have the idea of a sacred text, the Book of Moses, but also a coded text, Morse code, Morsis. We also have a sense that dreams are intimately connected to the process of scrying, in a kind of parodic notion of the Book of the Dead. So to scry in the Typhonian sense is to hold something against the light of the mauve zone, suspended between being and non-being. I love that title, Against the Light. At first glance, it sounds satanic. And that makes sense. Grant, in his early writings, thinks of Satan as the opposer of the light. But as he goes on, he increasingly gets into the idea that light and darkness are not good and evil. They are being and non-being. And being is only relevant or meaningful in relationship to non-being. Which brings us to dreams. Part 2 of Against the Light is called Mirror Oracle. So those two in a kind of punning portmanteau, mirror and oracle. Grant strives into a mirror on a table. He has a series of dream visions. The culmination of them is a spider with a human head that says if you hold this page up against the light, it will reveal something altogether different. And I want to suggest that this idea of controlled dreaming is another practice that is sort of encoded within Against the Light. So this is the idea, influenced by Grant's kind of thinking about tantric concepts of deep sleep and dreaming and waking and transcendental states and all of this, that if we recognize a dream as an illusion, we can control it. And if we recognize this reality as a dream, then we can shape it, to the point that he sees everything in Against the Light that actually happened to him as having first been manifest in the Mauve Zone and then was reified in the course of his scrying. And so there's a kind of metaphysical manifesto implicit in all of this that comes from outside the circles of time. This is the only kind of gigantic wall of text I'm going to throw up, but I kind of have to, because what Grant argues is that the unreal, the irrational, the surreal are of a different order of being, that true being has no existence because it does not occur within space and time, although it never ceases to be. Magic, then, is the science of objectifying this kind of eternal, non-existent, non-being into objective facts which are false and illusory because they exist in space and time. In other words, things that do not exist can nevertheless be real. They are negatively existent. That's a phrase that's also going to be used a lot by Andrew Chumbley. They exist in universe B on the flip side of the tree of life. And so the idea then is that the Mauve Zone is a kind of fourth dimension. And in order to be able to apprehend the limits or even the unreality of any dimension, we have to have a place to stand outside of it. So if we want to be able to see that the three dimensions around us are in fact illusory, we have to be able to stand outside of that in a fourth dimension. If we want to be able, we wake up from a dream, we realize that the dream happened in a split second, so its time was illusory. We were in our bed the whole time, so its space was illusory. And so the notion is that the Mauve Zone is that same fourth dimension, but in relationship to waking life. It's the space that we occupy in which we realize that our apparently solid objective reality is false and constructed and illusory. And he spells this out in Outer Gateways, that the Mauve Zone is the kind of fourth dimension through which we can see our reality as empty and non-existent. Sex magic becomes a really important formula for controlling dreams and thereby manifesting dreamed reality in matter. Grant is heavily preoccupied with what he calls the Kaula rite of the fire snake. We would probably refer to it as Kundalini Yogi. In his particular variety of it, he's interested in the ritual extraction of secretions from the body of a female priestess at various stages of excitation and detumescence. We see this process repeat itself over and over again in the narrative of Against the Light. It happens at a culminating moment at the end of part 2 at the cosmic level. So worshippers of Isis, and it's probably the new Isis, approach the goddess, and these beetles, the children of Isis, descend from her spine through the tunnel of her vulva. And this is kind of this moment of cosmic sex magic. But this also happens at a more sort of human level in the scrying visions that Margaret Leasing grants to Grant, in which he sees that his ancestor, Margaret Weird, was initiated into a coven in Rendlesham Woods by copulating with an extraterrestrial in beast form. That was her initiation. And of course, this goes all the way back to the second book of the Typhonian trilogies, in which Grant understands the figure of the Sphinx as an example of that sort of otherworldly copulation. Worth noting that this is all heavily allegorical in the sense that the new Isis is not for Grant meant to represent the sacred immanence of matter, but in fact the notion of antimatter and voids and black holes and of being manifesting from non-being. In other words, the Against the Light is reminding us in fictive form that otherworldly contact enables oracular transmission. Really interesting, most of the people in Against the Light never raised their voices. Alan Moore points out that all of these characters are remarkably calm for all the strange kind of cosmic horror that they're talking about. But there's one moment where Grant's maybe imaginary great uncle, Dr. Phineas Marsh Black, yells at him, screams at him. We get all capitals on the pages of Against the Light. He says, "Thelema is a blind if ever I saw one." And he goes on to sort of explain that change through will, the formula of magic and theory and practice, was never the heart of Thelema. That Thelema becomes 93, which is the same number as Iwaz, and Iwaz is a discarnate praetor-human entity. And so the notion, encoded throughout Against the Light, and indeed insisted upon in all capital letters, is that the function of Typhonian magic is to establish contact with beings of the other side, an idea that Crowley expressed very late in Magic Without Tears, which Grant and Grant's maybe fictional great uncle think is the heart of Thelema. Okay, well, if not through will, then how? The idea then is that oracular transmission manifests through tangential tantra, and we're back in sort of geometry again. So Grant's notion is that, let's see, I've got 3 minutes and 30 seconds left, so I'm going to talk really fast. Okay, here I go. So the idea is that a tangential tantrum, as defined by Grant, is a sudden and obliquely manifested oracle or transmission received outside of normal ritual procedure. And what's great about this is this got like 3 different levels of significance, because a tangent is something that runs at right angles to an angle through a circle. A tangent in the rhetorical sense is a digressive anecdote. And so Grant sees his digressions as never truly being digressive. They're always revelatory of the main point, even if he wasn't quite sure what the main point was. At the same time, and this I love, the singular of tantra in Grant's work is tantrum, right? So this is the idea of a childish fit that sort of disrupts the stately decorum and gravitas of a ceremonial working. And the biggest tangential tantrum that occurs in Against the Light, again, is this kind of manifestation of a spider with a human head. And this is significant in that Grant translates the word tantra as to weave, as a spider its web. He also translates tantra as a received teaching of non-human authorship, and he equates the idea with synchronicities. This idea of moving in web-like fashion through a text emulates and anticipates the notion of hypertextual navigation. Note that Grant refers to the Book of Oakbeach as a web of oracles. So what starts to happen is that Against the Light, it could have been a video game. Maybe it will be a video game. I think it would be like this game, The English Haunting, like a folk horror adventure game. It would be great. But it has qualities that are ludic, hypertextual, and anticipatory of blended reality, virtual, augmented, alternate, all of it. Grant anticipates many types of play. And it's just like with the Velvet Underground, everybody who listened to the Velvet Underground formed a band. Everybody who touches Grant or touches something near Grant, either Liber 231, the Crowley book that inspires him so much, or his work itself, ends up doing either a VR application like Arcanorum 231 or virtual worlds like Kyle Feight's Bardo Gaming. Seemingly almost an acknowledgement of this. One of the oracles of the Ninth Arch says, "What a lugubrious game," alluding to Salvador Dali's playful surrealistic painting. And so this phrase Against the Light becomes a kind of oracular hyperlink that jumps us back and forth between the Book of Oakbeach, the commentary on the Book of Oakbeach, Against the Light itself, the other books of the Typhonian trilogy. And significantly, the final vision of Part 3 in Against the Light is the memory of a pop-up book, which Grant's great uncle told him would reveal secrets if it was held up against the light. And I want to suggest to you that this vision of a secret, mystical, occult pop-up book is the closest that Grant can get to VR in his early childhood, and refers to this notion that the ritualists of the New Isis Lodge would deliberately enter into fictive tales as part of their ritual practice, anticipating virtual reality. So Grant, himself is aware of the notion of play. He interprets it as Lila, the hide-and-go-seek of pure consciousness, and Maya. And of course, there have been tabletop games, including Invisible Sun, that are openly inspired by Kenneth Grant, that show the Nightside currents flowing backwards. This is Monty Cook's Invisible Sun. Everyone should check it out. More broadly, though, Against the Light raises these questions of how practice is narrativized, something that we experience in the tutorialization of video games. I want to suggest, as I wrap up, that to describe non-existent things as real is fiction, to act as if non-existent things are real is play, and play as a model or paradigm allows for flexibility between fiction and non-fiction, being and non-being. So to sum up, what is Against the Light and what is its relationship to practice? I want to suggest that Against the Light is in fact a tangential tantrum at right angles to the Typhonian trilogies, that it does represent these practices, but not in a systemic way and not as willed causes. Rather, Against the Light is a Nightside narrative that through the looking glass represents not causes or effects, but acausal occurrences. It is the fourth dimension that allows us to stand outside of the Typhonian trilogies and understand them as malleable dream material because time and space are not real. Against the Light is Typhonian practice through the looking glass. Time and space are illusions. Non-being is more truly real than being. The true reality is the one mind which cannot be contained in the brain. Ritual practice is less important than its ricochet effect. Magic is what happens when you're trying really hard to do something else. And fiction is a medium for encoding practice upside down and backwards, because as Grant reminds us, in the astral light, operations relevant to it must be transacted in reverse. And that's my ending.
Or let you see. Did you say you can see it? It's, I can't tell you, son. If you can't see it, then you just never know.